Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm really thrilled today because we have State Representative Claire Cronin, who is my friend and colleague. Welcome to Rapping with the Rep.
And classmate.
Classmate. And also the chair, the House chair of the Joint Committee on the Judiciary. And thank you. We're going to talk about the criminal justice reform bill that we passed in the last session and some of the things that we're going to continue to do this session. So I'm really excited to have you here for this conversation.
And we're coming up on the year date that the bill was signed, April 13th last year.
I want to begin by talking about the way that it came together. I know that we had conversations about some of the priorities that I discussed with you, but I know you talked to a lot of other state representatives about their priorities too. So tell me how an important, really historic bill like criminal justice reform gets made.
Sure. So there were over probably close to 150 bills that were filed relating to criminal justice reform issues. So of course every bill has to have a hearing, there's testimony on it, but beyond that, it was important to me that when we turned out a bill from the House, that I wanted it to be a true reflection of the priorities of the House members. So I met with every House member who wanted to have an individual meeting with me on criminal justice reform. In addition to that, we met with all the stakeholders, whether it be the district attorneys, people from probation, parole, people from substance abuse and recovery centers, people that represent juveniles. But the idea was that at the end of the day, we wanted to have a bill that everyone felt their voice was heard, that it was a reflection of our House priorities. And at the end of the day, I think I can pretty much say we did do that. So that was a great thing.
What really bears that out, it was truly bipartisan because we had a majority of the members of both parties really coming in, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had a really, really strong vote in the House. The vote was 144-9, which meant that every single Democrat in the House voted for the bill, as well as 26 out of 35 Republicans. So it put the House in a very good position as we went to go into negotiations on the final bill. But it was one that really, truly reflected the priorities of the body. So that was great.
It really did. And sort of as an aside, people sometimes ask me about politics and about government and how things work in the legislature, people that are focused on the national legislature. And I tell them, this is different because in Boston, in the State House, we listen to each other and we don't ask, well, does that person that had that idea have an R or a D or what have you? We say, well, tell me about the idea.
Right. And I will say, like, I could give you specific examples to that. Before I had been appointed as the chair of the Judiciary Committee, I had filed a bill together with Representative Hannah Kane, who is a Republican from Shrewsbury, and we together filed a bill for compassionate medical release, which ultimately was included in the final criminal justice reform bill. But it was just an example of how we can work together. We're not like Washington. We actually did come out with something that was just really, everyone bought into it, both Republicans and Democrats alike. And we were able to put something at the end of the day on the governor's desk that he was able to sign as well.
Right. Plus, we really like each other, and it's easier to work with colleagues that we really get along with because we trust each other and we realize if we disagree, it's going to be a disagreement on the issues and not a personal or somehow contrived disagreement.
Truly, Washington could take a lesson from us. I really believe that strongly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the bill. What are some of the things that you're most proud of that are included in the criminal justice reform bill?
I would say overall, I'm proud of the width and breadth of the bill. We actually literally touched on every aspect of our criminal justice system, from the first time a person might intersect with our criminal justice system, which would be as a juvenile, right up until the end when someone is either released from prison and re-enters society, or even released from prison by way of compassionate medical release, when they are dying perhaps in prison and pose no threat to anyone.
Right.
And they can be released. So I'm impressed with the fact that we were able to go through so many areas of our criminal justice system, but if I had to pick an area that I was most proud of, it was a lot of the work we did around juveniles.
Yes, can you talk about some of the benefits that juveniles now will have in the system where they didn't have that previously?
Sure. we raised the age for criminal responsibility from 7 to 11. So previously, if a 7-year-old were charged, they could actually be charged with a crime in Massachusetts. Clearly, if a child at age 7 or 8 is being arrested, we know that there are further problems that they have. One interesting fact that came out, which is actually horrifying to me, was the fact that 73% of our juveniles that are within our juvenile justice system are what are called dual status youth. And that means that they are connected with two agencies. One would be the juvenile justice system, but the second always the Department of Children and Families.
Right.
So when you look at the fact that 73% of the children in our juvenile justice system perhaps began their life either abused or neglected, you see this as a problem. You know, we needed to provide them supports. So beyond that, we did expand a lot of treatment options for juveniles and allowed them. We know that the sooner someone is involved in the juvenile justice system, the more likely they are to remain in it and be in it as an adult. So the longer we can stop that trajectory, we'll have better results for the kids long term. So I think that was a good one.
It's really a great way to look at our criminal justice system and the way we are, which is there are some bad people who deserve to be in prison and deserve to be there for a long time. But there are other people who get caught up in the system and can really be restored if we're able to work with them and find the root cause of what caused this behavior in the first place.
Sure, and so many of the people in our prison population are in there and they have substance abuse or mental health issues. So the idea is to provide them with more opportunities for diversion where they can receive the treatment they might need. So we did expand treatment for our veterans, for people with substance abuse or mental health problems, more opportunities for diversion. But at the same time, we strengthen our laws in places where we should, because our criminal justice system is a system that involves crime and punishment. So while we were able to reduce some of the minimum or mandatory minimum sentences for low-level drug offenders, we recognize that we are in an opioid epidemic like we have never experienced before. And we strengthen the penalties with regard to trafficking of fentanyl. We made it a 10-gram mixture. Before that, it was just 10 grams of fentanyl. And we also made the strongest carfentanil law in the country, where any amount of carfentanil, because it is such a tiny amount that can cause death and cause death to many people, that any amount of carfentanil at all is considered trafficking. So we were able to sort between the people that are the traffickers and bringing, great harm into our communities, and those people that actually have addiction problems their own and are low-level offenders.
Yeah, and that's one of the things this bill does so well. It does, as you say, separate and focuses surgically on here are the problems that can be addressed through a restoration, restorative type of a strategy, and here are the people that really deserve to go to prison, that really deserve to be punished. And it's two different groups of people, and to do that and see that is important.
Right, and when you talk about restorative, you're one of the first people that come to my mind when I think of all the work that we did on restorative justice. And that's something that I know it was always one of your priorities, because we spent an awful lot of time talking about that. And once again, another program that really assists people and tries to keep them out of the system. But at the same time, also provides a lot of input of victims. And because when we talk about a criminal justice system, we can't forget the victims as well.
Right. So folks, restorative justice is a system which is an alternative to having someone get into the criminal justice system, to going into court. And what it does is it allows a victim of certain crimes and the person who's the perpetrator of that crime to get together and try to resolve the issue outside of court in a way that really respects the point of view of both people. And I had a friend talking to me just recently about a situation where her child got involved with a theft crime. It just didn't really understand what the consequences were of what was going on. And if this situation if restorative justice was there and available, things could have worked out. In many situations, you've got, a friend who who gets involved with a drug situation, and they'll steal little bits to just satisfy the need for obtaining drugs, and they get caught. And treating the drug issue is really what's going to solve the problem, because they didn't really see themselves as a thief, which is what ended up happening because of the drug situation. You take that away, and they would act totally differently.
Right.
And in many cases, because it's done within a community, the victim now can get together and look at the perpetrator, the person who stole from them, and say, do you know how it feels to have someone violate your trust? You know, I knew you, I know you, and you took it upon yourself to do that to me. They can then get that off their chest, they can talk to them, and the person can say, I'm truly sorry. You know,
and that matters quite a bit to the victims. I mean, a lot of times victims, they don't necessarily want to see the person that stole from them or broke into their home maybe go to the jail, but they just want to know that the perpetrator knows that the harm they caused to them really matters. So victims seem to get quite a lot out of this as well, and that was important.
They do. In those situations, the person will pay them back. Over time, they'll take responsibility, and that's, I think, a requirement of restorative justice. They take responsibility for what they did.
And the data does show that it reduces recidivism, which is ultimately one of the great goals of criminal justice reform. We hope to reduce recidivism.
Right. It's a program that involved several of my constituents. Bobby Bongiorno, the chief of police in Bedford, who lives in Arlington, was one of the major proponents of it, and that's how I learned of it when I first took office. He took me into his office and said, I want to tell you about this system, because we know that we're sending some young kids into the criminal justice system, and things aren't going to get better for them. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I remember him coming to judiciary hearings as well, and that was when I first really learned of it, when I was a freshman rep and sitting on the Judiciary Committee. And at the time, I would see that in some suburban communities, the police chiefs were doing this. And I represent an urban community, and I was thinking, boy, I would like to have this opportunity for some of the children in a poorer community to have the same opportunity.
Right, and that's just what this bill does. It puts a volunteer mediator into the picture so that someone can just make sure things move along smoothly and gets these conversations going, so that a lot of times it's kids getting into these situations so they can learn.
Right.
One of the other things in the bill that I've been working on, and it's so important and meaningful to this county, is the Middlesex County Restoration Center Commission.
Yeah, kudos to you on that one. That was a good one.
Thank you. So this was really an idea that Senator Cindy Friedman has been working on for years too. And this is a place that we can create so that when someone is picked up by the police on the streets for crimes that aren't violent crimes, it's really crimes of homelessness. Usually people are suffering from alcoholism or drug abuse, or sometimes it's untreated mental illness, and the police don't have anywhere to take these people other than to the station and book them, and they end up in jail until they're booked, or they go to the emergency room.
Right.
In these cases, it's either way too expensive, and if they go to the emergency room, they're out pretty soon, or if they're booked and then arraigned, they still come out the next day, and the condition that caused them to be out on the streets is ignored.
Right.
And they come back over and over, and it costs us more and more money. And so this is a commission we're traveling from state to state, learning about ways that other states have handled this, so that we can bring a pilot program to this county, so that people will have, well, the police really will have an option. We'll bring them to this center, they'll have detox, they'll start a treatment, they'll have a protocol. Of course, it's voluntary, we can't keep them there, they're not sentenced to anything, but hopefully we get people that understand that they can get better and get a chance to become productive and happy again.
Yeah, I know you've been working really hard on that, and we're really looking forward to the end result in the report when it comes back. So, I mean, I think that's going to be really important and very cutting edge as we go forward.
Yeah, and it all comes from this bill. It all comes from the collaborative effort that you put in to making this bill a reality, and eventually signed by the governor.
Yeah, it was a true group effort, though, I really have to say. I mean, this was an experience that, so many House members and members of the Senate as well, just put a lot of time and effort and care into trying to thoughtfully craft procedures that would ultimately meet the goal of criminal justice reform, which is always to reduce recidivism, reduce incarceration, increase public safety, and ultimately also save taxpayer money.
Right, right. Looking forward into this session, what are some of the priorities for the Judiciary Committee that you see that we're going to continue to work on now?
Well, as always, the priorities of the House tend to become the priorities of the members with regard to criminal justice reform. We, of course, have some people that would like to go a little further than we went, and there are probably some people that would like to take a few steps back. So I think we'll still have many bills regarding that because criminal justice reform took up such a great volume of the time on the Judiciary Committee. There are other issues we're looking to deal with. I know the governor has a bill that is before the legislature on dangerousness. So we will be taking a look at that strongly. We have one part of the criminal justice reform bill, we dealt with bail.
Right.
And the idea that nobody should be held solely for their inability to pay. So what we did is we codified a Supreme Court case that said that the judge would consider the person's ability to pay in setting bail. And in addition to that, we also established a bail commission on the criminal justice reform bill, which we are undergoing now. We had our third hearing on the bail commission this week, and so we're looking to see, what, if anything, we will do. There are some people that would like to eliminate cash bail to see if that would be helpful long term, and those are the issues we're looking at or to use risk assessment tools. So we're looking at all of that, and it will be a continuing conversation.
Well, that's so important because we're both lawyers and we understand that the purpose of bail is to just make sure that, well, the two things. First of all is if the person's dangerous, then they would be incarcerated waiting for, they'd be in jail waiting for trial because it's
the prosecutor could have a dangerousness hearing where bail is, truly supposed to just make sure that the defendant appears in court. And we did do some things that in the criminal justice reform bill that should help that. The court has a pilot program where they're sending texts to people to remind them of their court date, much like you might get from your doctor's office.
Right.
And sometimes people fail to appear willfully, but oftentimes it can be that they have complicated lives or problems in their lives that prevent them from appearing, and sometimes a reminder by text. The data shows that helps in getting people to appear for their court dates. So
just going back to people who are suffering from mental illness or substance abuse or alcoholism, sometimes people have trouble facing their problems essentially, and they don't come in, and a lot of times there'll be a younger person, and their parents are saying you've got to go, and they can't face it.
Right.
And in ways like that we can get them back, we can get them in before their problems become worse.
Yeah.
Because like you say, the purpose of bail, other than the dangerousness part, the purpose of bail is just to make sure they come back in. And so it shouldn't be something that's so out of reach to a defendant that really what it does is it just makes a debtor's prison.
Right, and the same holds true with fines and fees as well.
Right.
And we adapted the same standard where the judge would look into it so that a person was not held because of their inability to pay a fine or fee. And that's clearly something. The other thing I also wanted to point out is some of the things that we did to strengthen our criminal laws. For example, in the area of operating under the influence. Prior to this criminal justice reform bill, we only had an operating under the influence charge up to the 5th offense. So what we did is we created offenses of 6, 7, 8, and 9 with escalating sentences as well. Clearly, operating under the influence is something we want to limit in the Commonwealth, and that was a way to strengthen those laws. So in some areas, we lightened up some things, but in other areas, we strengthened them, and that's what made it pretty well balanced, to say the least.
Yeah, it was a long time in coming in that we were experiencing these laws and we were learning from it, and we were able to see that in this bill that you put together that was signed by the governor, like we said, and is now the law of our land.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Very good work. Anything else in it that you want to talk about? Any other aspects that you're
Yeah,
that you're
sure. I mean, as I said earlier, we tried to hit every aspect of the criminal justice system. So we made revisions, in our juvenile laws. We went forward and we gave things relative to bail, as we've already talked about. We created for the first time a limited situation where people, youths from the age of 18 to 21, can expunge a criminal record.
Right.
If they are, have one offense, one and done, very limited circumstances, but we're giving people that opportunity. When people have paid they've made their payment to society for the crime they've committed and they've done their time or anything, we reduce the time for people on their CORI forms. So
Right.
we did do some changes within our CORI. And then we went into programming in prisons. As when people are in prisons, we want to make sure that when they re-enter society, they've paid their price, that if we're going to let them re-enter society, we really have to let them re-enter society. So we have incentivized prisoners to get involved in substance abuse and treatment programs,
Right.
so that when they come out, they're able to do that. When they come out, another thing, we just extended the time where they have to pay a parole fee. A guy gets out of prison, has to pay a parole fee, doesn't have a job, and it sets people up for a cycle that sometimes is hard to get out of. So we tried to, slow down the trajectory, but it also to make changes that don't just repeat a cycle, and I think we did that. Also, for the first time, we made changes to our what people commonly call solitary confinement, but the technical term is segregation within our correctional facilities. So prior to this, there were really no restrictions on it, and we set up some oversight that didn't exist before. For the first time, we created compassionate medical release, which would allow a prisoner who was, on their dying days, essentially, that they could be released to their home as long as they pose no safety threat to others.
Right. And those conditions that we could put to make sure that they...
Exactly. Right. And that's, that actually saves quite a bit of taxpayer money. We also did things, and this is really critical, we have so many untested rape kits in Massachusetts. The number is actually into the thousands. So what we did is we put forth requirements that all these kits be tested. The idea is hopefully we'll be solving some crimes as a result of that. So that was a good thing. And we made changes for women. A lot of the provisions of the bill wrap around data. We have new systems for collecting data on women in our justice system and juveniles, and so that we can learn from the data what are the best practices as we go forward.
Right. Some of the things that you just mentioned that I just want to go back to is
Sure.
the problem that we face in our prisons, which is that a large majority, I think maybe 70% of our prisoners are there because of a drug dependency issue. And while there,
And/or mental health, a lot of co-occurring disorders.
That's right, co-occurring, they've got both. One is masking the other. And they get their treatment sometimes for the first time when they're in the prison system. It's the largest, I think, drug treatment center that we have is our prisons. And they're coming out essentially clean because they can't obtain the drugs while they're in prison. The problem is, though, if they go right back on the streets to where they started and they don't have a job and they're frustrated in their attempts to get a job because they owe fees, fines, and because it's hard for them to get a driver's license. Things
Or
like
housing.
that. Or housing, that's right. Then essentially what are they going to do? And before long, and before not very long, right, the same people that they were involved with that got them into the trouble that started this, they're right back again.
Right.
And so giving them a chance is not only important for them, it's important for the community.
Right. I would also have to say, here in Middlesex County, your district attorney has been very progressive in some of the policies relating to treatment and all that. And Sheriff Peter Katusian, he has really, really been cutting edge
Right.
on a lot of these programs that allow people to get treatment and to have a better reentry when they do get to return home to their families and loved ones.
Right. He was a former state representative and the former
Right.
chair of the healthcare
Right.
committee, public health committee, and he's toured the country talking about things like medically assisted treatment for people in prison so that they can start their treatment for their substance abuse, but then continue it after they're out. Again, they just can't be left to their own devices.
I'm pretty sure he had the first pilot program using Vivitrol
Yes.
for when people leave. But yeah, and I know, I believe you're working with him on the Middlesex County Restoration.
The commission. That's
the
right.
commission,
That's
yeah.
right. He's the co-chair.
Yeah.
Along with members of the Department of Mental Health and things like that. He is, and he travels with us as well. This is so very important to him because he sees it. He's responsible
Right.
for our prisons, and he sees that we can be doing so much better for people if we can provide this alternative, this diversion,
Right.
to get people treated before they become involved in our system. They sometimes call the intercept 1 is the first time the police arrive at the scene.
Right.
And he talks about intercept 0, which is let's start getting people treated before the police ever have to be called in.
Right.
And again, it's better for them, and it's better for the community, and it's a lot less expensive.
Right.
And so that's very important. And so these issues that you raise affect us all.
Yeah. And you have really done a yeoman's job in advancing the cause forward, and it has been just such a great pleasure to work with you on so many of these issues.
Well, it's really, the pleasure is mutual, Representative, because your door is always open, and like you said, you're there to listen and to teach when there are areas that you know of, become expert in, and in this criminal justice area you certainly have. But part of it, I think, is that you listened to everybody and created this product.
Must be my
that reflects
mediator
us all.
training. I worked as a mediator
did.
for years, so that is one of the first things. Listen.
That does help you in the House of Representatives, doesn't it?
Yeah, I kind of
Bringing
use that in my
parties
campaign.
together. I can see why.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really came out with, I think that this is, I mean, you must have heard from people from other states, and this is a criminal justice reform model that I would think that a lot of states can learn from.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting when you talk about red states and blue states? Criminal justice reform really began as a red state
Right.
issue. Now, granted, I think it started down in Texas. One of our House colleagues, Randy Hunt,
Yeah.
Republican from Texas, he was very big on it because they had so many people incarcerated, and they realized that the prisons were filled with people. It's somewhere around $150,000 a year to
right.
incarcerate someone. Treatment is cheaper. And so it depends, why you initiate it, but it was really, truly a red state issue. And as a blue state, Massachusetts was one of the first states that did that. But interestingly enough, this past September, I was invited to a conference in Portland, Oregon, run by the Council on State Governments and dealing with criminal justice reform. And it was really refreshing to hear when you're at this conference how far ahead we are other states. I mean, and the truth of the matter is Massachusetts is number 1 in having the lowest incarceration rates in the country, although as compared to the world, there's probably still improvements. But it was nice to be in a different state where you're sitting across from a guy from Oklahoma, I believe, and they have more people incarcerated than anywhere. So it felt good to know that they were cited Massachusetts in a lot of the discussions we had out there. So it's pretty good.
Part of our work on this restoration center was to learn from a site they have in San Antonio. And what they told us was this is so much less expensive to deal with people in a treatment basis than in a jail setting or having them come to the hospitals. In fact, their system is set up differently than ours because of our health insurance system. But over there, what they did was they went from hospital to hospital and raised money and said, you can essentially, we'll treat them here and you won't have people showing up in the emergency room.
Interesting.
Because of that. And they gave money. They said, this is a lot less money. In fact, $1 million here, $1 million there. And that's how they were able to start their program. It's a fiscally conservative approach, really, to what we might think of as a socially progressive outcome. They work together.
That's tremendous.
So well, it has been and continues to be a pleasure to work with you,
Likewise.
Representative Cronin, my classmate and my friend, and
Yes.
thank you so much for coming on to
And thanks
Rapping
for
with the Rep.
inviting me to your district.
This is great.
I know how much you care and love the district, so it's nice to be here with you.
I do. We'll have to go out and enjoy, and I'll show you. We'll go enjoy some of the town. And Representative Cronin, thank you for coming on Rapping with the Rep. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Thank you.